Amid rising tensions and the possible threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, world leaders are on standby with implementing significant sanctions against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russia this afternoon said they are recognizing two Moscow-backed separatist regions. Talking Points breaking news analyst Chilekasi, Adele, and White House analyst Jacob Goldberg join us tonight with more on the developments there. So Chilekasi, let's start with you. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zlenski is expected to speak any minute now. What are the latest developments?
So we know that Zlenski spoke over the phone with President Biden today for about 35 minutes. He also just spoke within the last hour, tweeted out that he spoke with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. NBC reported today that the Biden administration officials discussed plans with the Ukrainian government, for Zlenski to leave Kiev in the event of a Russian invasion. So he would move to Lviv, which is about 50 miles from the U.S.-Polish border.
And another thing to keep in mind is these two separatist regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, were recognized as independent by Russia today. Now, why is this important? Well, Russia now can move, quote, peacekeeping troops into these regions. And this is the first time we've seen that Russia has actually brought troops into the Ukrainian border. Although now Russia thinks that they are actually separatist regions and independent to their own, it is still a very important thing, especially the United States looking into this, thinking that this is an invasion from Russia into Ukraine. Another thing, just a few minutes ago, we saw that the United Nations Security Council is going to hold an emergency meeting. This is important for two reasons. Number one, the United Nations Security Council is the only council in the United Nations that has the power to actually enforce anything in the United Nations. And also, Russia is a veto member of the United Nations Security Council, which means that anything that goes through there has to go through Russia.
And now going back to you, Chilekasi, Zlenski spoke publicly this past weekend in Munich, Germany. What exactly did he have to say?
So we're awaiting that word from him right now. But the last time he spoke publicly, of course, was Saturday at the Munich Security Conference in Munich, Germany. Many Western leaders advised Zlenski not to come to the meeting, saying with all that's going on right now, it may be best for him to stay in the country. But in that meeting, he spoke. He called for peace talks with Putin. He said he didn't know what Putin wants and he wants to meet with him. That was in about a 19-minute speech. And then he spoke in a little Q&A with journalist Christian Amanpour. He stressed that there is risk, but he said that there's no need to, quote, panic. And this kind of tells you the difference between the intelligence of the U.S. in the West and the intelligence of Ukraine. Zlenski says he trusts Ukrainian intelligence, but again, just showing the differences there. He attacked world Western leaders. Western leaders have said this is going to happen, there's going to be war, and Ukrainian intelligence is not quite there yet. But one of the big things he harped on was sanctions. He said, basically, if the West is coming and telling us that war is going to start tomorrow, war is going to start next week, he said that basically they should put the sanctions on now rather than waiting. That was his big message, one of his big messages in a very impassioned speech from Zlenski on Saturday. He also called out NATO. He asked for an answer on Ukraine's prospect of entering the alliance, and he was very frustrated with what he says has been ducking and dodging, essentially, from NATO members, NATO allies.
And Jacob, Vice President Kamala Harris was also in Germany for the National Security Conference. What did she tell NATO allies about this possible invasion?
Well, there was many world leaders at this Munich Security Conference, a big event. Boris Johnson, for example, from the United Kingdom there also. But Kamala Harris spoke a lot about how she has concerns for the European continent. Here's what she had to say.
Today, as we are all well aware, the foundation of European security is under direct threat in Ukraine.
And Harris kept re-emphasizing Biden's key points that he's been making all week about how NATO has to stand strong together and put economic sanctions on Russia if they are to invade Ukraine. And this is important because there's some European countries which rely on Russia, such as Germany. We've talked about the Nord 2 pipeline on Talking Points before, and how they rely on Russia's energy to help their economy, and how some countries may not be as prone to try and put these economic sanctions on Russia. But, from the United States perspective, they believe that Russia needs to be punished for these actions of invading the Ukraine border.
Now, Vladimir Putin was asked by Zlenski for talks on peace. No response from him as of yet. What has Russia, been doing throughout all of this?
So we see the decrees issued by Putin today to recognize those separatist regions of Ukraine as independent. But over the weekend, he ordered the Russian military to perform nuclear drills. He oversaw Russian military exercises on Saturday. And the Russian Defense Ministry says that intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and cruise missile tests tests were performed, and they added that they planned those maneuvers a while back to check the readiness of those weapons as well as the reliability. They hold some of these drills on an annual basis, but one of the interesting things about that is that Saturday's test involved Russia's fleet of weapons on the Black Sea, based near the Crimean Peninsula, in which they annexed back in 2014. There are no ICBMs on the Black Sea fleet, but there are cruise missiles, there are warships, submarines also there as well. And it's also important to note that Putin invited, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to these drills, to oversee these drills. And that's interesting because Lukashenko, in the past, he's been closer to Putin. He's also offered to host Russian nuclear weapons. And if you're looking at the geography here, it's Russia, it's Belarus, right under, it's Ukraine.
And finally, Jacob, the question that's been asked for weeks now, what is President Biden's plan if the invasion happens?
Well, Biden has two main things he can do here. He can either go the military route, which is probably not going to happen because we obviously know both countries have nuclear weapons and it will not end well for either country if they decide to go in the military route. But Biden has tried to keep diplomatic options open. He said that the fine line of when he will stop trying to reach for diplomatic options will be when Russia invades Ukraine. And we saw that today with these two, recognized independent sections of Ukraine. When Russia put these peacekeeping groups there, Biden reported that he will no longer meet with Putin. This was reported by Reuters just a few minutes ago. So very important here that Biden is no longer going to want to meet with Putin. He's going to take these sanctions on them and make sure that they face actions for their or consequences for their actions.